You can't just inherit land and do whatever you want with it. That's the first thing she said. Chin high, hands on her hips, like she owned the place. And I was still in my black funeral suit, still smelling cedar and saddle soap in my grandfather's study, while the grief was fresh enough to taste. The front door had swung open without a knock. She marched to the desk and parked herself like an inspector on a TV show clipboard, up voice clipped, and before I could even stand, she was reading off violations. I'm Priscilla Lane, president of the Cedar Vista Community Council, and we need immediate compliance, she said, pointing at a printout of my porch swing, the cottonwood by the gate, and then, like she was asking to borrow Sugar, the family plot in the west pasture that she said must be relocated in 60 days. I looked at the chair she'd taken my grandfather's chair, and I heard my own voice come out calm in a way that surprised me. Ma'am, you walked into my house without permission, and before you finish your list, you should probably know my day job, I said. And when she lifted an eyebrow, I told her, I'm Mason Hale, governor of High Plains. She blinked twice, then smiled the way some people smile when their bad idea is the only idea they brought. Governor or not, you're subject to community guidelines, she said. I walked to the old oak desk, laid out the papers. I grew up on territorial deed. From 1883 water rights recorded before statehood heritage. Status stamped by the State Historical Office maps with a boundary line. That's older than her subdivision. And I told her those rules stop at my fence. She skimmed, scribbled like the law was a suggestion, and I walked her out, my hand shaking on the knob. Not from fear, from that metallic anger that tastes like pennies. You know what I mean? At dawn, my phone buzzed motion alert west fence, and I took my grandfather's binoculars to the kitchen window where he used to watch storms roll in. Two men in coveralls moved like they'd practiced wire cutters, survey tripod. Not vandals, professionals. They started near the family graves, cut clean spans, stacked posts carefully, like they planned to return. And while I watched, a text popped up from an unknown number property correction crew working today. Do not interfere. 60-day deadline stands. Yeah, that happened. I fed the footage and the text to my chief counsel Nora Patel and to a reporter. I trust Ty Carter. And Nora said what I didn't want to hear. If you can stand it, let them dig their own hole a little deeper. By mid-morning, 400 feet of fence lay down like a surrender flag, and we drove straight to the courthouse. Judge Albright watched the video with that slow, careful attention judges use when they know the case might end up as a lecture in law school, signed a restraining order on the spot. No contact, no approach, no coordination, and Deputy Ortega served it. When I handed the papers to Priscilla, she tapped the heading like it was a party invite and asked, "Are you sure you want to be the governor who fights his neighbors?" And I didn't answer because the paper did. Back at the ranch, I opened the safe I'd never seen open combination in my grandfather's neat hand, and there was a folder labeled in block print, "If they come." Letters from preservation officers. A U.S. survey stamp, notes that made something tight in my chest loosen and ache at the same time. Turns out he knew someone would try this. He just didn't know they'd be this bold. She violated the order almost immediately. Slow drive-bys phone up 3 passes in one evening. All of it caught in HD with the plate numbers like billboards, and I could have had her picked up right then. But Nora said, "Give me the kind of record even a defense attorney's mother won't argue with." So I breathed and let the camera run. Meanwhile, the neighborhood woke up. A note at my gate in tidy handwriting invited me to a meeting in a living room, And Thursday night, I sat on a folding chair in Grace Moreno's house, while people told stories that all sounded like the same song in different keys. Walt, a veteran, fined for a flag 2 inches too wide for a guideline nobody could find. Vanessa, a single mom, told to rip out her vegetable garden because tomatoes are apparently anti-aesthetic. Kids' sidewalk chalk outlawed on a Tuesday, and Ben Klein, an accountant, with the look of a man who counts to sleep, held up spreadsheets that showed special assessments for landscaping that never happened, and payments to companies that only existed on invoices. We put it all on a whiteboard and called it what it was, harassment with a spreadsheet. By morning, a petition to remove the board had hundreds of signatures and a plan for elections that looked more like democracy and less like a private club. Then the twist walked in on Friday afternoon, wearing a suit that tried too hard. He introduced himself as Ethan Voss Consultant, and he didn't sit so much as fold palms on his knees like a man talking to a priest. I consulted for Ms. Lane, he said, dry as paper. She hired me to figure out how to acquire your ranch for a resort. The plan was to bleed you with paper cuts, fines, inspections, pressure on lenders, whatever made operations impossible until you sold at a discount. We had timelines, budgets, investor letters, and we discussed, I'm ashamed to say it, ways to foul your water if nothing else worked. My stomach went cold, the way an empty church does, quiet and echoing, and I asked him why he was telling me. Because federal agents started calling after that restraining order, he said. Because she's planning a big gesture this weekend. Because I don't want to watch my kid grow up with a father who did nothing but harm. He set a digital recorder on the table like a confession, hours of planning meetings with names and dates, and Nora's eyes lit like a surgeon's when the right tools finally show up. We wired him and waited. Saturday was the memorial I'd postponed for my grandfather. Reed Hale, nothing fancy, just coffee in tin cups. Neighbors on the porch, a little plaque on the bench under the cottonwood, and then a rental truck eased to the shoulder beyond the gate. 3 men jumped out with stakes and neon tape. Priscilla climbed down, last wearing a polo that said, Field Inspector, like she'd ordered a costume overnight. Governor Hale, we're here to conduct a mandatory compliance inspection, authorized by public development standards, she called. And retired Judge Marchant, who was sipping coffee by the steps, said to nobody and everybody. That is impersonation of a public official. Phones came out, not mine. Everybody else's. She planted the first stake on our side of the line, walked toward the memorial bench, kicked aside lilies like they were litter, and reached for the wood with my grandfather's name burned into it. I stepped between her and the bench. Lane. You're violating a court order, I said. And when she reached again, I took her wrist and moved it away, gentle but final. No, I said. Not today. She jerked back and yelled, Assault, obstruction of enforcement, and I looked over her shoulder and said, Call 911 for assault, restraining order, violation impersonation, and attempted desecration. Sirens are an echo before they're a sound out here. Then they're on you 3 cars. Sheriff Diaz, Detective Willa Green, Deputy Ortega, with a stack of papers and a face that said he'd had enough. They watched 30 seconds of video, asked 2 questions, and the cuffs clicked. She didn't cry. She smiled and said, See you at the reassessment hearing, which didn't exist. But denial can be a powerful drug. Monday night, the community center felt like a small-town election and a revival meeting at the same time. Childcare, in the back, water pitchers sweating on long tables. People standing 3 deep in the hallway because the district attorney was there. D.A. Lauren Kim. doesn't do theater. She does evidence. And she ran Ethan's recordings and bank slides like a class you don't talk through. Plans to cut fences to flood me with paper to break a ranch they didn't build. Assessments that vanished, checks to shell entities' legal fees paid to ghosts. Grace read names of families fined for rules that weren't in any covenant. Vanessa held up photos of a garden she replanted that morning, stubborn as spring. Walt stood taller than his years and talked about the flag that draped his father's coffin. Then the screen lit up with my west fence in HD cutters, flashing neon tape, a worker's voice saying he said start by the graves, and the room went so still you could hear the old air conditioner consider its options. D.A. Kim said Priscilla was being held without bail on conspiracy fraud, harassment impersonation, and violating court orders, and nobody clapped because relief isn't loud. It just lets you breathe again. The vote to suspend the board was unanimous. Grace was tapped as interim coordinator. Bylaws were rewritten at tables with highlighters and stubborn hearts not behind closed doors. The trial moved fast because the evidence didn't wander. Nora put on a clinic. Ethan testified. I testified. The tapes played the paper trail unspooled like a dare, answered. And the jury came back quicker than it takes to mend a fence in heat. Guilty on conspiracy and fraud, and the whole list restitution ordered lifetime ban from any HOA or community leadership. A restraining order, fat enough to use as a doorstop, and a sentence that my head calls appropriate and my bones call fair. Ethan didn't